a lot to do, I think, with the reason that a lot of us are here. Um, one of the reasons I enjoy living in Bisbee is because it has a diverse arts and entertainment um, opportunity for just about anybody that comes here or who lives here. So for the past umpteen years, we've Judy and I have both enjoyed going out on the town and going to uh, live entertainment, whether it's theater in the Gulch or Bisbee Repertory Theater, the Occasional Theater, or BTV. We've had lots of great comedy and drama and uh, lots and lots of great music too. And as an historian, I often wondered about what did people listen to, what did they see, what did they do for during their spare time. And um, once I got into this project, it became truly fascinating. So I'm hoping to share this with you tonight as far as what I found. And it's just basically touching the surface of what I learned about uh, entertainment in Bisbee back in the early days. So if we can go ahead and get this PowerPoint going. So what do I have to do here, Allison? It's been a while.
So at the bottom of the screen, it's highlighted in green. It says share screen. And then you can either choose the desktop or you can choose the PowerPoint itself if it's open.
Okay. I will choose the PowerPoint. So let's see. And here again, if I had an 8-year-old, it would already be done.
8-year-olds are amazing. It's true.
Yeah. So
just click on the document that you're sharing and then hit OK at the bottom.
Okay.
Or enter. There you go.
Okay, but I need the PowerPoint. There we go. Is that on now?
Yep.
Okay, great. And let's get this.
There you go. That's great.
There we go. And there's that lovely, that's a picture postcard that Allison was kind enough to dig up that shows the Orpheum in all its glory. Probably looking at that picture somewhere around 1910, 1911. So I want to start by going back to the earliest days of Bisbee so we can get an idea of how things progressed and also about how people spent their time. So 1880, Bisbee had a population of 15. By 1888, it had a population of several hundred. By 1890, it had a population of a little over 1,500. Now, Bisbee started growing fairly rapidly once two things happened. Once the Phelps Dodge company got involved in investing money and really building the infrastructure for the mining operations, that attracted a lot of workers and brought in a larger population. The thing that really made this town go, though, was the arrival of the railroad in 1896, or excuse me, 1889. Because until then, there really wasn't any way to get people in and out of Bisbee quickly and efficiently and cheaply, nor was there any way to get goods and materials out in and out the same way. But once the railroad arrived, it made things a whole lot different. I want to set the stage a little bit about what Bisbee was like. It was basically a man's town, almost all male population in the early 1880s. Families started moving in fairly early on, but the number of males to females was pretty lopsided for quite a while because a lot of single men were attracted to jobs here. Once they were off work, and they worked hard, they had very little to do. And Opie Rundle Burgess, who wrote the book Bisbee not so long ago, was the granddaughter and daughter of two of the earliest pioneers in Bisbee. And what she described in her book was, once the men were off work, they had two things that they could do: drink and gamble. And I think because she was a refined lady and a decent church-going sort, she didn't mention the third thing that men had to do, which was to go visit the houses of ill repute. But opportunities for wholesome, healthy entertainment in Bisbee were very limited in the early days. And that started changing once the population started growing. This gives you a really good idea. This is Main Street in Bisbee about 1890. And this is Bisbee in the early or late 1890s here. It's grown quite substantially. And you can see how quickly the town spread, how quickly buildings started appearing all over the place, commercial buildings, residential buildings, but also there was a great change as far as the fabric of society. Civil society started growing leaps and bounds. The original town was a few miners, maybe a couple of saloon keepers, very few businesses. But as time went on, the business community became quite large and sophisticated, and so did the civil society. So we started seeing lodges develop, we started seeing churches and schools and all kinds of things that large modern communities have. And this was a remarkably industrialized modern city by the last few years of the 1890s. It was amazing how fast. And this happened all over the West. Towns grew from rude mining camps into sophisticated cities in just a matter of a few years.
Mike,
So
that
yes,
can you go back? I think that's the library on the left.
that is the library on the left. The
Yay.
post office and the library were in the same building, and that's horse manure out in the street, of course. We don't have that problem anymore, but we in the library is in pretty much the same place it was back in the 1880s.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, shameless plugs are always welcome. Now, enterprising businessmen are always looking for ways to make money, and Ernest Bernard Mason was one of the earliest Bisbee pioneers. He came here about 1882, I believe. And he got involved in the water company very quickly, originally bringing water in barrels and in bags on mules, but he was the father of the Bisbee Naco Water Company and made a wad of money here. One of the ways that he made his wad of money was opening various and sundry businesses. One of them that he opened up in 1894 was a roller skating rink. It was basically a wooden floor with a wooden roof, no walls, so it was just open air. And it was an opportunity for people to do something besides drink and gamble, and it was available for children and families. So he's getting in on wholesome, healthy entertainment pretty early on. He teams up with a fellow named Lemuel Shattuck. And Lem Shattuck is also a very early pioneer in Bisbee history. He came out here in the early 1880s, was a cowboy, a miner, saved his money, worked hard, opened a lumber yard in Brewery Gulch, opened a beer distributorship, started the Miners and Merchants Bank. This guy was a go-getter, and he was a self-made man. He teamed up with Mason, and they opened up the Bisbee Opera House. And this, the building construction started, I believe, around 1896. And it's kind of sketchy, but we know that it was up and operating in 1896. And the building was finished on the inside in 1897. So it's open and ready for business. This is the original Opera House right here, this rectangular building. And here it is on Opera Drive. And if you've ever wondered why Opera Drive was named Opera Drive, now you know. The Bisbee Opera House was located on Opera Drive appropriately. And there's Howell going up to Opera Drive and then around. The cemetery, the old cemetery where City Park is located, is right below there. So give you an idea of where this building was located. It's now a vacant lot. It's actually a parking lot. So he opens the Bisbee Opera House, and Lem Shattuck is the original manager. Now, he doesn't know very much about entertainment, but he's a smart man and he figures things out pretty quickly. And they get things going at a pretty rapid clip. Now, just to set the stage, at the time that Shattuck and Mason opened the Opera House, this is also the time when vaudeville is becoming one of the most popular, in fact, it became the most popular form of mass entertainment in the United States. You could actually call vaudeville the first mass entertainment form. It started as saloon saloon acts that later became more respectable and relocated outside of saloons. So individual acts would be combined into a program and offered at a local opera house or other public facilities so that people would have entertainment besides drinking, gambling, and doing other things that are less respectable. So vaudeville by the 1890s was going all across the United States. And one of the interesting things about vaudeville is that the performers, there's a variety of acts, about 20, no longer than 20 minutes apiece. So it would be fast acts coming out, doing their thing, and then leaving the stage, and another performer coming on. But they also interacted with the crowd. They tended to use modern slang. They tended to dress very much up to date fashions. So people were excited to see them because they were learning about the outside world, especially in places like Bisbee, Arizona, which was often in the sticks. So Murray and Mack were one of the very first groups to come to Bisbee, and they were here in November 26, 1898. And this was Charlie Murray and Ollie Mack. These fellas were comedians. They did comedy shows in Irish dialect, which was a very popular thing to do. If you wanted to be a comedian back in the late 19th and early 20th century, you either performed in blackface, pretended you were Irish, or pretended you were Jewish, because ethnic humor was what people responded to, and it's what all the comedians did. So these fellas did a show called Finnegan's Ball, and they stayed together for 21 years until one of them got tired and said, "I'm not going on the road anymore." What you have to keep in mind about performers like this, and about vaudeville, and about legitimate theater that did traveling at this time, was that these fellas, ladies and gentlemen, were on the road for 40, 50 weeks a year, traveling by train, going from place to place, according to wherever they were being sent by the booking agencies that had arranged for them to do their tours. And Barney Ferguson was another early Bisbee performer, and he came to the Opera House on December 22nd, 1901. And he also did ethnic humor. Oh, Murray and Mack returned again to Bisbee in 1909. So a lot of these performers, if they liked working in a town, they'd come back frequently, or they'd stay longer than they were supposed to. But in the case of Murray and Mack, they came once and then came back again 11 years later. They weren't Irish, they were Americans pretending to be Irish. Barney Ferguson was actually an Irishman, and based out of Chicago, and he performed McCarthy's Mishaps and a couple of other Irish dialect comedies for years and years and years. Pretty women, new songs, new dances, funny comedians, new specialties. And specialties were something that was in vaudeville that was sort of like the spice in the stew. And I'll explain to you what specialty acts were here in a second. As a matter of fact, there's a specialty act right there. There's a couple of them. Griffith, the world's greatest hypnotist. And whenever these folks were booked into Bisbee, they were the world's greatest at what they did. So he was a comedian and hypnotist. And the fellow on the right is Frank Mortimer. And Frank was a juggler and a knife thrower. And you can see on the table there his knives and his juggling balls. So these were specialty acts. In most vaudeville acts, those 20-minute acts consisted of singing and dancing, doing the things that most performers do. But there were always different types of specialties that would kind of liven things up. So there might be an acrobat on the bill. There might be an animal act on the bill. There might be a juggler or a hypnotist or a mentalist, or someone else that would have a different kind of performing act to show. Another kind of entertainment that came to Bisbee was called the Rube play. And a Rube play was basically a regular melodrama or comedy but the central character, either the narrator or a main character in the play, was somebody like Uncle Josh Spruceby, a Rube, unlettered, uneducated person who was kind and honest and had a great deal of common sense. So that was a specialty type of play that would be performed. And he was known as that funny old farmer. What really impressed me about this particular performing group was that they brought a lot of things with them, but one of the things that they brought with them was a functional electric circular saw that they'd set up on stage along with a log, and they'd tie the heroine to the log and they'd act the scene out. So you would hear the saw cutting through the wood and hear her screaming as the hero rushes to rescue her. Hopefully everybody did things right, because if you screw it up, boy, it's going to get messy. And before any one of these shows, there was always a band or some kind of motivating performance group outside of the theater to try to bring people in. So in this particular case, they might have Uncle Josh outside in his in character, in costume, and performing his part and urging people to come in. Or they'd have a small group in the performing ensemble that were musicians that could play music, and they'd walk down through Main Street, parade around, and up Brewery Gulch to get people to get interested and come to the play. Blackface, and this tells us a lot about what America was like in the late 19th century. Jim Crow was ubiquitous in America. I don't think there was any place where African-American people were treated with dignity and respect. Even in the North, segregation was pretty strict and enforced both formally and informally. It wasn't like down South where you had, Jim Crow laws, but that didn't matter. African-Americans in the North and in the Southwest were restricted in terms of lodging, in terms of transportation, in terms of where they could eat, where they could live, and also where they could go for entertainment. So if Uncle Tom's Cabin was playing, as was the case for these folks right here, and let's see, this was 1902 right here, that the Hagen's Uncle Tom's Cabin Company came to Bisbee. These were all white actors. So the parts of Uncle Tom and Elijah and all the other African Americans in the play, the slaves and the escaping slaves and anybody that wasn't white was played in blackface. Now, again, you can see by this theater bill, they would travel probably with a boxcar full of scenery that they'd set up inside, and it would go from town to town with them. They'd have musical instruments that they bring with them and whatever else that they needed for the show. Uncle Tom's Cabin, even though it was written in the 1850s by Harriet Beecher Stowe, remained a very popular play, and they were still performing it at the end of the 20th century or 19th century. Minstrel shows were incredibly popular and remained that way. But when the Opera House wasn't being used for professional performing groups that required an admission price, they'd also use it for other things. So you'd find lodges and fraternal groups would rent the hall out, and the original Opera House, the wooden one that you saw in the photo, it had rooms for meetings and places where people could get together and hold whatever kind of event that they wanted to on the second floor. And the first floor was used for lodges and all kinds of things so you would have the Democratic and Republican conventions, and the populist convention, party conventions would be held at the Opera House. And Irish nationalists would have their events there. So just about anything that required a large venue would take place at the Bisbee Opera House. And there's the very first example of a chocolate tasting. Professor Corson and his bonbon party. Well, one thing that they realized pretty early on was that that old wooden opera house, well, it was a new wooden opera house, but that wooden opera house wasn't nearly large enough to hold 50, 75 performers, all their scenery, sometimes animals, sometimes circular saws. So they realized pretty early on that they were going to need a new building. So in 1901, A.L. Manahan and that's Ambrose Llewellyn Manahan and Benjamin F. Moore, they leased this new building that was constructed, beautiful building on brick. They leased it and opened up what was called the new Bisbee Opera House. This building later on became a lodging house and then became Franklin School. It was a school for African-American students until it was torn down. Now, Opie Rundle Burgess, the author of Bisbee Not So Long Ago, who wrote about her mother and grandmother's experiences coming to Bisbee in the early 1880s, mentioned that Bisbee had an opera house, but opera never was performed at the opera house. That was used for all kinds of other things, but not opera. Well, that's not quite the case. There were several occasions that I found where operatic companies, formal operatic companies performing in French and Italian, would come to Bisbee and perform. This is the Andrews Opera Company right here doing the Mikado in that photo. And the Andrews Opera Company was based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. It had started operating in the 1880s. It traveled all over the country in its own special railroad car. And it also had the capacity to do not just formal opera, but also light opera. So this is them doing Gilbert Sullivan's Mikado, but they also did Carmen and a lot of other operas. They kept performing until this was in 1901, and they stopped touring in 1901 and opened up under the name of the Boston Ideal Opera Company right after that. So Bisbee did really have opera come to the Opera House. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Nashville students came here in March 1900. And the original Nashville students were neither original from Nashville, nor were they students. They were a group of African-American performers who usually consisted of 9, who traveled all over the country and did what amounts to an African-American minstrel show that also had legitimate music such as spirituals and other forms of music in it. But they also did a lot of eye rolling and hammed it up for the white audiences. Oh, the original Nashville students did something pretty close to minstrel performances, but the Fisk Jubilee singers also came here to Bisbee, and they performed straight up gospel and spirituals and other forms of music, and they were definitely not self-deprecating or in any way trying to ham it up for the white folks. Now, popular entertainment pretty much remained the same for a long, long time. We go back thousands of years, the ancient Greeks, Romans, probably Egyptians, Babylonians, Chinese, probably every civilization in the world had entertainment and art. And that consisted of a performer getting up on a stage and doing what they do, whether it was Greek tragedy, whether it was comedy, whether it was Shakespearean, whether it was opera, whatever form of it was somebody standing on a stage and doing their thing in front of a live audience. And it remained that way up until the earliest years of the 20th century, when moving pictures, as they were known in those days, became practical. And all of a sudden, the collective attention of the American public just shifted over to this new and exciting form of entertainment. And what you're seeing right there is the very first instance that I could find on the right of a motion picture, or a moving picture in those days, as it was known, being shown in Bisbee. And it was the Bob Fitzsimmons, Jim Jeffries heavyweight championship rematch fight that was held in San Francisco. And that fight was filmed and then shown all over the country. And this was shown here in Bisbee in 1903. So the fight actually took place in 1902, but it wasn't shown in Bisbee until 1903. The next instance I could find of a moving picture being shown in Bisbee was in 1904, and it was the Great Train Robbery. Then after that, you started seeing in all of the theaters, started seeing movies being shown, but they were very primitive movies. They were very short, 1 reel or 2 reels. They usually lacked a lot of structure. Most of the time, it was just something that was being filmed straight up without any interpretation, different camera angles, or anything else. So, but it was fascinating to people because for the first time, they could see other human beings in accurate depictions, just almost real life, without lacking the sound in front of them. They could see wars, they could see landscapes, they could see sporting events. And as of 1903, with the Edison Company filming the Great Train Robbery, we start to see people writing scripts, directing actors, and producing dramatic films. Very short, very primitive, but within a short period of time, they got a lot more sophisticated. Light opera was a big deal here because, first of all, you didn't have to speak Italian or French to understand it. Second of all, it was fun. And third, there were a lot of touring companies doing light opera. This was the Olympia Opera Company, and they did a lot of different types of light opera. They did comedy opera and romantic opera, and that's the gals over there in their clown suits. This was an ensemble of 40. So this is an expensive thing to do, costumes, that many performers. And I think you can start to see how motion pictures are going to become a more and more interesting alternative to live acts for theater owners, and a less expensive and very versatile form of entertainment for the consumer. This was the find that I was just extremely thrilled to make, because this was a person who pretty much disappeared from history books. Even African-American performing artists didn't know about this lady. And when I found out who she was, looked her up after I saw this in the newspaper, I was astounded. This is Cissy Retta Jones. She was born in the South, but her family moved in Virginia. Her family moved her to Providence, Rhode Island at a very early age. Probably the best place you could possibly live in the United States for African-American family at that time would have been New England, because it was abolitionist, probably quite a bit less restrictive in terms of how you could live and what you could do. Cissy Retta Jones had an extremely beautiful soprano voice, and at a very early age, she received vocal training in Providence, and was encouraged to go out and sing professionally, which she did. And in the mid-1890s, she sang at Carnegie Hall right after it opened. And she was nicknamed Black Potty after Adelina Patti, who was considered to be one of the greatest operatic singers in the world at that time. She was Italian. And of course, You couldn't call Sissy Retta Jones the greatest singer in the world at that time. They'd have to qualify and say she was the greatest singer of her race. She sang at Carnegie Hall, Madison Square Garden. She sang for 4 presidents. She toured Europe a number of times. She toured South America and the Caribbean a number of times. She toured all over the United States. She was a dignified woman, and as you can see in that picture, she wore lovely gowns. She would also take the ribbons and medals that she was given at performances wherever she toured, and she would pin them to her gown. And I think what she was trying to show people was, yeah, I am somebody that's worth listening to. She continued touring, and she came to Bisbee in February 1907 to the Opera House, and then returned again in March 1909. Both times standing room only performances, both times the newspapers were just incredibly complimentary about her singing voice. One of the things I'd like to do, if that's okay with you, is to give you an example. There are no recordings of what this wonderful woman's voice sounded like, because African-American performing artists in the late 19th and early 20th century, they weren't encouraged to record, because who would want to listen to the record of a Black person? So Allison, I think I'm going to need your help here. I want to get out of this, and I want to get into something else.
Okay.
So I hit the stop share.
Well, go to share screen. Sorry, go to share screen again. Do you already have it open? View options. Okay, yeah, you can leave it and then go to the next thing you have open.
I go to stop share.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And what I'm going to do now is open up a performance that was given at a lecture by the author of the biography of Black Patty, Sissy Retta Jones. And this was a performance done at the University of South Carolina by a lovely young lady named Rose Davis. Had we been in Bisbee in 1907 and 1909, this is what we would have heard. Okay. Oh, wait. Okay. Let's see. All right, now I need to get back into, I want to share a screen, so I hit share screen.
Yep.
And go to this. So are we there?
Just about. One more. Hit OK or double click it.
Okay, what do I, is this up now? Can people see this?
Not yet.
Okay. So what have I done wrong? I'll be glad when we can actually be in front of each other again.
You're doing great. Don't take your time. It's wonderful that you're here with us and sharing this wonderful history. And
okay, I want to share the screen, so I hit what? Share.
The one you have open, the one you're choosing. Double click it or click and then hit enter.
Yeah, the only problem is it's not right here.
Okay, it's not then just share your desktop and then you can go to wherever it is.
Wish I had an 8-year-old to help me. It's this one right here.
I'm gonna get you an 8-year-old.
I could use one. Let's see if we can get this going. Share screen, and then I go to share to the one I'm. Okay.
What application is it? Is it YouTube?
It's YouTube.
Okay.
So again, I'm trying to figure this out here.
Once it's highlighted, either double clicked, it sounded like you were doing that, Is there a button on the lower right that's enter or select or hit the return button?
There's a share button on the lower right, but don't I
Yeah.
have to have something open for it to share?
You have to, yeah, you have to have or you just share your desktop and then you can go to YouTube and we'll see it.
Share my desktop.
It's like the upper left or middle up, top row. Next to whiteboard, it gives you every document that's open, and then your desktop, which just shares your entire
Okay.
computer with us.
Is it the screen? I don't
Yeah.
see a desktop. Okay. Well, I've got that right now.
Oh, okay.
But how do I get to the other thing?
Maybe exit full screen, and then because you're in full screen right now.
Yep.
Did I hear somebody else jumping in?
Huh.
Oh no, you have to take off full screen because you're in that
Yeah, and I don't know how to do that right now.
hit escape. Well,
I hit escape.
okay.
I'm
Well,
screen. Okay. You know what? If we're not going to be able to do it, we're not going to be able to do it. That's too bad.
Mike, you can send me the link and I'll share it with people here.
Let's just go on. It's becoming a royal pain. Unless you've got a better idea. And
You keep going with this presentation and I'll see what I can do on
okay.
the link.
Anyway, we had a lovely performance of Old Folks at Home, which Sissy Retta Jones sang at each one of her concerts by Stephen Collins Foster. And I'm sorry that we can't show that to you. This is the downside to remote learning and to having inept people doing a program. Concert bands were huge too, and they toured, and this was a 50-man concert band, the LA Band, and they came to Bisbee in December 1904. They were led by Francesco Ferallo, an Italian immigrant who was famous for being extremely energetic as a conductor. And you can tell the cartoon right there. He would jump up and down and wave his arms and gesticulate. And he was termed the volcanic genius. So they would play, and I have a YouTube selection for them too, the Old Comrades March, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to do. You can look these up yourself online on YouTube if you go to Sissy Retta Jones, and you can listen to Rose Davis's wonderful voice at 27 minutes into the performance at the University of South Carolina. So concert bands were another professional type of group that would come to Bisbee. And as big as the new Opera House was, it became pretty obvious that as the shows became more elaborate and vaudeville became more elaborate, and also the other performing groups that were coming to town were so big and had so many things to go onto the stage that the new Opera House wasn't going to be big enough. So in 1906, Alonzo Llewellyn Manahan got together with some local folks who promised that they would pony up enough money to be able to build a new theater, performing arts facility that would be the biggest in the Southwest. So this is an ambitious guy. They hired originally Trost out of the architect out of El Paso to do the performance. And Fred Hurst, who was a local Bisbee architect that did a lot of buildings in this town, ended up being the person that designed it. And that's the proposed new Bisbee Opera House, $30,000. It would hold 3,000 people. And it was going to be the showcase, the performing arts showcase of the Southwest. Interestingly enough, it was going to be located right above the library and post office. So that would have been your neighbor. And it would have had a long ramp to get people up to it. Somehow that deal fell through and that building was never built, which may have been a good thing because in the 1950s, Highway 80 was going to come through right where that opera house would have been located. But it sure would have been nice to have seen a building that big and that impressive in Bisbee, up above everything else. Instead, we got the Orpheum, and that was built in 1907, and it was owned and operated by the Iris Theatrical Company. And that's pretty much the way it looked. It was a wedge-shaped building. It has exactly the same dimensions as Gore Park. And that's the inside of this building. Now, if this is what you have to imagine, is 700 to 900 people. It ordinarily would hold 700, with a balcony above, and then first floor. And imagine 700 people packed in there. There's no amplification. There's no microphones at this time. And what it must have been like. Very small space. And aren't you glad everybody used dial? The other thing that's really important to consider is when this was built, there was no external fire escape. So had a fire broken out in this building, those folks at the top would have been burned to death. The city did make them put in an outside metal fire escape. And this was opening night. It's pretty cool. They had acts coming in from Los Angeles. They had acts coming in from Chicago. And I'll tell you a little bit about these guys. The Stewart sketch team was a vaudeville act. They would do one-act plays. That's what a sketch was at the very beginning of the show. They did the opening sketch. And it would consist of singing and dancing and jokes and keeping lively, light entertainment. They were followed by Miss Edna McDonald, who was a singer and a change artist. And I kept trying to figure out what a change artist was. I looked it up on the internet and I found, and I've got a secret episode where a change artist appeared. A change artist was somebody who could come out dressed as she was right there in a full gown, hat, and everything else. And she would run out, exit stage right, and run around in the back of the stage, and seconds later come out totally different persona, different costume. And she would do this a number of times during the show. So she had umpteen different costumes back there and could get in and out of each costume and wigs and makeup and other things within seconds. It was truly amazing. She worked up and down the Iris vaudeville circuit, which consisted of several cities in Arizona: Tucson, Phoenix, Globe, Bisbee, Nogales, and also they had theaters in, or they had their circuit in El Paso and Cananea, which was an American colony at that time. So Edna worked both in Bisbee and then went up and worked Globe for a while. And I thought, what a cool thing to do for a living. And even when she was a grandma, having to explain to somebody later on what a change artist was would have been pretty interesting. And then Murphy and Francis were the finale. And Murphy and Francis were an act. Their motto was, we're Irish by name, we're coon by nature. So these were African Americans, and coon was a less pejorative term than the N-word. Still not one that one would use in polite company, although it was commonly used at that time. They were African American vaudeville performers that would do the closing act, and they would have, again, song and dance, and they would play on their Irish names. Her name was Frances Ellich, and his name was Albert Murphy, Bert Murphy. And they performed together for many, many years before they retired as well. So it's interesting. The opening night for the Orpheum had an integrated cast, and this is very, very rare in a vaudeville theater. And look at the prices. So front row seats, all the way back probably in the rear of the balcony to 15 cents to 75 cents. Now that seems like even 75 cents seems like a small change, but you consider that the average miner in those days only made $6 a day. In minstrel shows, this is one of the most uncomfortable things that I ran across doing this, researching this, and they were very, very common. And this is what you see on the right. Gordon's minstrels actually did come to perform in Bisbee, and we don't know the name of this minstrel group. It said high school minstrels. Those are definitely not high school kids up there. That's an adult professional minstrel group. It's all white. The men in blackface. There would be no white women performing with black men on a stage in Bisbee, Arizona in those days. Minstrel shows consisted of 3 acts. It had an interlocutor who was the master of ceremonies, and it had 2 principal characters, Mr. Tambo and Mr. Bones. Mr. Tambo with the tambourine, Mr. Bones with the bones, playing the bones. They would do an olio where everybody would come out and perform. They would do comedic acts, songs and dances, usually with a cakewalk and buck and wing dance. They performed the way that they thought white people thought that black people would act, which was comedic, and it was not respectful to the African American. And this is a really good example. The Opera House had closed in 1907 and then reopened. I think they were trying to figure out how do we compete with the Orpheum, and they opened with a minstrel show. And this is an example of a white performer and how he would blacken up his face. The amazing thing about vaudeville and about blackface was that even great African American performers like Burt Williams, who was famous for The Preacher and the Bear, he performed in blackface. He blackened his face to make himself a caricature of a black person. This just is a sign of the times. And it also helps explain why racism is still as prevalent in this country today, because it was ubiquitous then. Moving pictures became more and more popular as time went on, as they became more sophisticated, as more camera crews were going out and filming events. And they filmed everything. They filmed waterfalls. They filmed factories. They filmed police officers busting dens of inequity and opium dens. This is the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the aftermath of it. And this film got widespread audiences all over the country. People were fascinated by it. And these were all short films. There were 11 different films on this series. Also included the Cananea strike. So somebody had taken a movie camera down to Cananea when the miners went on strike and filmed that as well. But we're seeing motion pictures, 1906. First one was 1903. And by 1906, we're starting to see regular bills, or they would appear as shorts in between acts along with the vaudeville in legitimate theaters. So motion pictures are still a sideline, but they're becoming more and more prevalent. This was the Royal Theatre, and I looked and looked and looked and looked for photos of this theater. The only photos I could find were disaster photos. This was after a flood in 1908. This theater opened in July 1907. It opened as the Irish Theatre. And then the Irish Theatre, which was part of a chain of theaters, it changed its name to the Imperial Theatre, and the Irish Theatre moved to Lowell. And then the Imperial Theatre became the Theatre Royal. So this was located right next to 55 Main. And it had as you can see, an arched entrance. And then in 1907, and again, Jim Crow and racism are never too far away from performing arts. But this was 1907. Let me see what the month was. Or excuse me, December 1908. The Clansman came to town. And the Clansmen included 2 carloads of scenery and effects, a troop of cavalry horses, obviously lots of white sheets, and 75 members of the cast. This was a theatrical adaptation of Thomas Dixon's novel, The Clansman. And this was a novel that purported to tell the real story. It was sort of like the Lost Cause that the southern states put out after the Civil War, that they weren't really fighting for slavery, they were fighting for states' rights. And after the war was over and the South was prostrate, the Yankee carpetbaggers came in and riled up the blacks, who were really contented before the Northerners got there, and that the blacks were raping women. And this is in the play and in the book. They were lewd and dishonest, and they were egged on. They wouldn't have been that way had it not been for the Northern carpetbaggers. So this was all a way to attack Reconstruction and to justify the getting rid of Reconstruction in the South and returning to segregation and Jim Crow. And I find it really disturbing to see a Ku Klux Klan rally, and that's what that is right there. It's kind of hard to see, but those are all folks in white sheets. That's the way they would have appeared on the stage, and it's under the title Amusements. Now, fortunately, there was a lighter side to entertainment, and Walter Arnhem came to Bisbee. Walter was here for a number of weeks, November 1908 up until January 1909. He was supposed to be here for 2 weeks, and he stayed for 2 months. And this was a professional touring company that had all kinds of plays in their repertoire. So they could do play after play after play, and then they'd repeat those plays after they go through a series of them. They also had vaudeville performers who would go out and perform between the acts, as you see down there, 5 big specialties. So they kept people entertained here for 2 months. And when they left, they were still, I'm sure, looked at in very high regard. And this is Walter Arnhem right here, and this is in a movie called Lena's River, or Lena Rivers, excuse me, that was made in 1914. Walter Arnhem retired from touring with his stock company in 1913 and went back to Broadway and was a regular performer on Broadway. When I saw the folks that he performed with, I was pretty impressed. Ethel Merman, Bert Lahr, lots and lots of people who were stars in Broadway. So he was in a lot of shows. He performed up until 1936, from 1913 to 1936 on Broadway, and also made 3 movies. So the people that were coming to this small town in the middle of the Mule Mountains, or small city in the middle of the Mule Mountains, I should say, these were professional groups of very well-trained artists who went on to have some pretty substantial careers, including this fellow, Roscoe Conklin Arbuckle. That's him on the left, and that's Walter Chapman Reed on the right. These were fellows from California that had been involved in theater and vaudeville for several years, and they got on the circuit, came out to Bisbee in May 1909, and were supposed to be here for a week or 2. They did sketches, so they would do 1-act musical plays each performance. And Roscoe on the left weighed 300 pounds, had a voice so good that Enrico Caruso supposedly told him, if you ever decide to get rid of this vaudeville business, you have the potential to become the world's 2nd greatest singer. You might know him better by his stage name, which was Fatty Arbuckle. And they came out to Bisbee in May, and they stayed until December. And I have never seen anywhere else a vaudeville team that stayed in one place at the Orpheum for 7 months. This is truly amazing. So each week, these two guys would get together and put out a new one-act sketch. And I'm just thinking about with 10 songs, how difficult that must have been. Now, Walter Reed, that's him in his persona. He played Mr. Finnegan. He was an Irishman, and Roscoe would often perform as a Dutchman, so he would use a German voice with a German accent because ethnic humor is what got people going in those days. And you can see Walter with his sideburns. He also had a pipe and a shillelagh to complete his Irish ensemble. So they stayed for 7 months in Bisbee, became incredibly popular, joined the Elks Club. Warren Ballpark opened while these guys were here. And Roscoe would go out and entertain the crowd during the ball games and actually umpired some games at Warren Ballpark. He also refereed wrestling matches. He even registered to vote in Bisbee. So these guys were incredibly popular performers. And Roscoe would go on to become, and there's their the announcement about them opening at the Orpheum. And this is one of their typical shows. They would change shows every week. So at Coney Island was one show, 10 songs, and Roscoe's wife, Minta Durfee, would participate along with other local performers. So they would put together a show every week. And I'm just thinking, what an incredible thing to do. These guys had amazing talent. Roscoe and Walter both went back to California, and Roscoe, well, they toured on the Orpheum circuit in Arizona first. They went up to Globe and performed there. They went down to Douglas and performed there. Then they went back to California, and Roscoe got into movies, became the second most popular movie performer in the United States after a fellow named Charlie Chaplin. So if you went to theaters between 1913 and 1921, you'd be seeing comedies, 30-minute comedies, originally by the Keystone Company. So he was performing for Mack Sennett, along with the Keystone Cops and Harold Lloyd and some other, and Mabel Normand and some of the other great comedians and comedians that were performing in silent movies in those days. You would have seen him there, and then he moved to Mutual and made a ton of movies with them. And then on Labor Day 1921, this incredibly wealthy, beloved, respected, adulated film comedian decided to hold a party in a suite in a San Francisco hotel. And during that party, which lasted a couple of days, a young woman named Virginia Rapay became ill and died. He was charged with rape and manslaughter, although there was no evidence at all to indicate that he'd had been involved in any kind of foul play. The district attorney wanted somebody to pay for it. There was also a movement to put a curb on the licentious behavior of Hollywood stars. And this was considered to be the straw that broke the camel's back. This poor woman who died in a hotel room because of him. And he was actually tried 3 times. He was acquitted, hung jury the first 2 times. And the third time, the jury unanimously found him innocent and wrote a letter saying that he never should have been charged to begin with, and that they're convinced he was completely innocent of the affair. It destroyed his career. He never got back into making movies. He directed movies, but he never starred in movies, never acted in front of a camera, and he died in 1933. It's a really tragic story. He was a beloved person in Bisbee, and when you pass by Gore Park, you think about Roscoe Arbuckle, Fatty Arbuckle, performing there for 7 months on the stage along with Walter Reed. The two of them made a movie together, and I wish I could show you a clip from that because it's a really funny movie. You can go to YouTube and look up Miss Fatty's Seaside Lovers, because it's the only thing that I could find that had both um, Roscoe Arbuckle and Walter Chapman Reed playing in a movie together. Reed made other movies, but not with Roscoe. But that one is called Miss Fatty's Seaside Lovers. He plays it in drag, and he's wickedly brilliant. And the Keystone Cops are in it, and also Harold Lloyd. So it's a pretty good film. You can look at for yourself. Star Theater opened up. We're starting to see more and more theaters opening up all over the country. They're called Nickelodeons. So for a nickel, you could go in and you could watch whatever offerings that they had. And this was in the Jacob Schmidt building, which is located just to the north of the brewery building, the building where the stock exchange is located. That big wedge-shaped parking lot located between Elmo and Quarry on one side and Chuckleheads on the other side, and the Silver King was the location of the Star Theater. And if you look right here, you can see an electric star that was put up there to advertise the theater. This block was owned by Jacob Schmidt, who is a Swiss immigrant who had his finger in everything, just like E.B. Mason and Lem Shattuck and other enterprising Bisbee men were concerned. There was a movie trust at that time that pretty much locked out a lot of movie producers that didn't join the trust. They were locked out of performing or sending their movies to theaters. And Jacob Schmidt was one that refused to take part. And he said, "We'll show no movies that are produced by the movie trust." Now, this was interesting. I found these photos in the online archives. I haven't been able to access the actual photographic archives of the Mining Historical Museum for obvious reasons, but I found these two listed under actresses, and they were donated by Edward Carabeo, an old Bisbee family, and they were dated 1915, Mary Pickford making a movie in Bisbee. Now, that intrigued me because I knew that there was a lot of movie companies coming out to Arizona, and this was also the time when the movie companies were moving from the east, from New Jersey and New York, out to California because the weather was better. You can work year round, and if you want to film a movie on location, you've got Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and the rest of the West and Southwest right there. So I thought, yeah, that's quite possible. I could find absolutely no mention of a movie being made in Bisbee by Mary Pickford, nor could I find in the credits under Mary Pickford any movie that looked like it was made in Bisbee. However, that surely looks like Mary Pickford. This is surely a movie cast. That is surely the Copper Queen Hotel and Bisbee Hillside and back. And that definitely says El Paso and Southwestern Railroad on that passenger car right there, which was the railroad that started in Bisbee in 1901 and serviced Bisbee. So it's looking like somebody needs to do some serious digging to find out. And that sure looks like Mary Pickford right there. So I'd say there's ample opportunity right there for somebody that wants to do some sleuthing and some investigating and digging deep to see if we can find that. Unfortunately, most silent movies were destroyed, burned up in fires, or just disintegrated as a result of neglect and being made of silver nitrate. So a lot of movies were lost, and this could very well be one of the lost movies. Well, we saw The Clansman. It was a play based on the book by Thomas Dixon. And along comes a brilliant, absolutely brilliant movie director named David W. Griffith. And he makes a movie out of the book that he calls Birth of a Nation. And if you ask any film history instructor or anybody that teaches film as art in universities today, what's the movie that you would have your students watch to show them how a movie should be made? They're going to tell you it's Birth of a Nation. This movie was made in 1915. The camera work, the editing, the way the scenes were set up, the directions, everything is just snap on. The acting is brilliant. And it's a movie about glorifying the Ku Klux Klan. What impressed me about the fact this movie came to Bisbee in April 1916, the Bisbee mayor stood up and said, "We don't want this movie here." Now, this is a time when most white Americans were pretty prejudiced, but here is the mayor of Bisbee saying, this is likely to cause some white people to become enraged and go out and kill some of Bisbee's black citizens. So they tried to stop it from being shown. City council overrode them, and with probably a little influence from the Orpheum Theatre folks, and the movie was indeed shown. This is the only full-page advertisement I have ever seen for a movie in the Bisbee Daily Review, advertising The Birth of a Nation. I would recommend you see the movie just because it's one of the best movies ever made in terms of cinematic quality. The theme and content are aberrant, but when you consider that this man did this in 1917 or 1915, it's a work of art. So the Lyric went into the space where the Star Theater was in the Brewery Gulch in the Jacob Schmidt building in 1913. And the Lyric was owned by the Diamos family. They were Greeks who owned a chain of theaters all over southern Arizona. They owned theaters in Nogales, in Douglas, in Tucson, and Bisbee. And they moved their theater in 1917 to where it is today. And they sold out later in the 1920s. But the Diamos family continued to be influential in the theater down here. One of their kin married a fellow named Ted DeGrazia, who worked in this theater in the 1930s. It was really a nice place, a really, really nice theater when it opened. And if we could see it, we could go in today, I think we'd feel a little sad about what's happened to it. And that was in September 1918, the Orpheum ceased operations, and a day later, it opened as the Grand Theater. Several weeks later, the flu pandemic arrived in Bisbee, and all theaters were shut down. So from October until late December 1918, there were no movies shown. But we started seeing a couple of things happening at the time that this theater changed from being the Orpheum to the Grand. There were 6 theaters: the Eagle Theater, the Royal Theater, then the Eagle Theater, the Star, then the Lyric, and then theaters also. There were a total of 6 theaters operating at one time in Bisbee at the peak, and this was about 1918. And this is also when movies became far more sophisticated, not only Birth of a Nation, but lots and lots of directors, lots of producers that were willing to take chances, lots of great actors coming out. So let's take a look at some of the people who appeared on the screen in Bisbee during those years. Charles Chaplin came over to the United States in 1914. He had a horrible childhood, worked on the stage in the UK, came over here and became an instant sensation. Who was the guy that loaned him the Derby? It was a fellow named at Keystone. It's a fellow named Roscoe Arbuckle, who mentored Charlie Chaplin when he first came over. Chaplin developed the little tramp persona and took off like a skyrocket. John Barrymore, the profile, brilliant actor, didn't want to be on the stage and was talked into it by family members. He was a member of two families of famous thespians, the Drews and the Barrymores, hence Drew Barrymore. And he went into movies in 1913 and made a lot of really good movies. Cracksman was where he played a character that was a burglar and safecracker who was also a member of society. So he stole just for the thrill of it and the fun of it. So John Barrymore and his sister Ethel also appeared in movies here. My favorite Western actor of all time. I love Westerns. I love all movies, but I love Westerns. William Hart, definitely the most authentic of all Western actors. If you ever get a chance to watch a William S. Hart Western, a silent movie, it's amazing what he could do. He always insisted on playing for authenticity. He said, you're going to dress like people actually dress in the West. You're going to act like people actually act in the West. And our photo plays, our moving pictures will represent the way the West actually was. One of the best ones you can see if you want to is one called Tumbleweeds. It has to do with the opening of the Oklahoma land rush and the end of open range ranching in the Oklahoma Territory. He actually has a speaking part in the version that's on YouTube because it was remade in the 1930s when he was very, very old, and they added that speaking part at the beginning as an intro. His favorite position was crouch with two pistols in hands. And people loved his movies. Westerns were incredibly popular. And as you can see, he broke the record at the Orpheum. So how many people can you get in there to watch a Western? Douglas Fairbanks, before he became the acrobatic swashbuckler of the Zorro movies and Sinbad movies of the 1920s, was a regular leading man. And in this movie, he played, and this was a common theme in Westerns, they wouldn't let a bad man be truly bad. There was no such thing as an anti-hero in movies in those days. Censors wouldn't allow it. Communities would not allow somebody promoting bad behavior. So a bad man had to be somebody who was actually always good at heart, and something always happened at the end. He would save, in this movie, he saved the heroine's life as he was dying. But it's amusing to me to see Douglas Fairbanks, who was this incredibly funny, charming, energetic man that could do, he was an acrobat as well as an actor. And in the 1920s, put those skills to great effect in some truly memorable movies. Here he's a cowboy. Theda Bara, incredibly beautiful woman, the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants. Her real name was Theodosia Burr Goodman. That's right. Theda Bara was named after Aaron Burr's daughter by her Jewish immigrant parents. That's got to be a story. She was typecast pretty early on. She played a vampire, and that's how the term vamp actually got into common usage. And she didn't really like being typecast into those roles, but it made a lot of money. Tom Mix. Now, as authentic as William S. Hart was, Tom Mix was flamboyant, flashy. He was the guy that wore the tallest hat and the fanciest clothes and had a fancy saddle and everything else to go along with it. So he was more for showmanship, while William S. Hart was more for authenticity. And Tom Mix made Western movies for 25 years. He made them up until about 1936. And he died in Arizona in 1940 between Florence Junction and Oracle Junction on Highway 77 in a one-car accident. Gloria Swanson, incredibly beautiful woman, and she played almost always in either romantic comedies or played in romantic dramas. But in this movie, she played a young woman who was flirting with all the men at a summer camp, and she ended up rescuing a man that was paraplegic. And while she was rescuing him, um, she couldn't explain that she was rescuing him for suicide because she didn't want people to realize he was trying to kill himself. So she couldn't account for her whereabouts and became a shamed woman. And anyway, it's an incredible plot for this movie. And she played a lot of great roles in the 1920s, was nominated for Academy Awards 1928, 1929. Went out of the movies and came back in 1950 to play on Sunset Boulevard. Boy, was she good in that. Norma Desmond. So these were some of the people that played in movies in Bisbee, and there were just tons and tons of fabulous actors and actresses that were in these silent movies. And if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube and look up some of these. They're incredibly good, well-made movies. The plots are great. You don't have to have spoken word in order for these folks to get their points across. They were brilliant actors. So I'd like to show you where these places were, where the movie theater. Some of you know where they are. The Lyric, we all know where that's at. It's on Necco Road. But Royal Theater, and that's it right there. This is right there. This is Subway. And right next to 55 Main. And you can't see it here because of this. It's the next storefront over, going downhill towards downtown from 55 Main. Doesn't look anything like it did in those days, but the building is still there. And that's the Busy Bee right there, by the way, which is now a parking lot. The Lowell Theater still exists. And I could find and what just amazes me is that there are so few photos of any theater other than the Orpheum. The Orpheum was in a conspicuous spot, but you would think somebody would have taken photos of all these other great theaters as well. This is a Dave McCrae watercolor that we have in our home. And that's what it looked like when it was still in its theater configuration. You can see the lobby right there. And this is the way it looks today, owned by the Oldfield family and used as a construction company building, but it still stands. That's the old Orpheum, and it was still the same building. It was turned into a garage. So they gutted the interior. The exterior was still this beautiful configuration with the inset arches. And then later on, it was covered with corrugated sheet metal. And then, as we all know, it became Gore's Garage. And then it was torn down in the 1990s. So all that's left of the Orpheum is memories. And that's the way it looks today. This is where the Schmidt building was in Brewery Gulch, this wonderful wedge-shaped building. Had you walked through Brewery Gulch at the time when this building and the other buildings all were there, you would have thought you'd have been claustrophobic because buildings were so close together and there was so little empty space. Well, anywhere in Old Bisbee, if there was a vacant lot, it's usually because there was construction in progress. So this is where the Schmidt building is today, where the Star Theater and then the Lyric Theater, and then it became the Star Theater again, where it was located. Is now just a parking lot and a memory. Pretty sad. The Opera House is also just a parking lot. And if you walk up Opera Drive, just as soon as you get past City Park, you'll see a big parking lot. And that empty spot right there is where the location of this building and the original made of lumber Bisbee Opera House was located. And if you look down off of the street or off of the parking lot, you'll see foundations and other remnants of this building, which in its last iteration was Franklin School for African American kids in a Jim Crow Bisbee. So that's the story. And what we had was a wonderful, absolutely wonderful period from the late 1890s up until about 1920, when Bisbee was at its peak of great entertainers, great performers, beautiful theaters, and places for everyone to go to have a good time. And if anybody's got any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Mike, do you want to stop the screen share?
Yeah. What did I do?
Oh no, I think
No.
there's a message. Just a thank you from the Druckmann brothers. I learned so much. Thank you, Mike. Does anyone have any questions? If you'd like to unmute yourself or type it in the chat box.
Yeah, most of what I put out today is true. So,
Mike, I was going to say, oh my gosh, look, it is the first chocolate tasting, the bonbon party.
yeah.
And sometimes that is the way that that history works, that events evolve into another event, like the theater changing its name. The next day, it's a new name. And I'm sure at the time, everybody was, oh, we like the Orpheum. We miss the Orpheum, you know.
We've always done it this way.
Yeah. So, but I think I might have to have a bonbon party now that I know it's historical. Thank you, Angelica.
There's a few things that I'd like to impart if I could. And one of them is how much is missing of Bisbee. You know, there's a lot left as far as the physical structures and things in Bisbee. And people think, wow, this is a really neat town. But there is so much that's gone now. If there's an empty lot in Old Bisbee, there's a memory attached to that empty lot. There's something that was there that played an important part in the history of our community. And the sad thing is, there's a marker where the Orpheum stood in Gore Park that doesn't mention the Orpheum. There's nothing in there about it being a performing arts facility and the great artists that performed there. There's nothing in the parking lot where the parking lot is now to indicate that the Bisbee Opera House existed. No interpretive sign, no photograph, no acknowledgement that Sissy Aretta Jones sang there in 1907 and 1909. So there's work to do, and there's lots of performing artists in this town that should take umbrage of the fact that our great artistic heritage, performing arts heritage here, has just been basically ignored.
It's really amazing. And yes, it is part of, we have been an artist community for far longer than just since the late 70s. Ann Rich has a question about, was there a drive-in theater and where was it? I think there was one down Naco Highway.
Naco Highway.
Yes, below. You can still see the markings from an aerial view.
Was that the Fort Apache or the Cochise drive-in? One was in Douglas and one was in Bisbee. But there was a drive-in movie theater over there. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I remember when it was down there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You remember what it was called, Donna?
No, but I remember it wasn't too, you turn onto Naco Highway and then it wasn't too far down. It was on the left. I don't remember. It wasn't open when I was here, but I remember it being there. I don't really remember it being torn down, but it was,
Yeah.
Well, it's in my book. It's in my book, and I have a speaker from that theater. Likewise, there's a picture in my book of the Royal Theater as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd sure like to see that picture of the Royal Theater.
Yeah, it's in my book. You got my book.
I have your book. I'll have to open it up. I looked. I must have seen it because I did read it. And
for those who don't know, that is author Doug Dunn speaking to us, and his book is also available at the Copper Queen Library. You can call 10 to 5 to put it on hold.
Yeah, there's a couple of books I'd like to share with y'all.
And Mike's books are also available at the Copper Queen Library.
And this book This is, and you can get this ILL, I'm sure. This is Cicciaretta Jones. It's by Maureen D. Lee. Cicciaretta Jones, the greatest singer of her race. And I bought this when I found out about this amazing lady. And this is a truly, hello, Mojo. This is a truly fascinating story. This woman today, if she was alive today, would be one of the greatest entertainers in the world. There's no doubt about it. I mean, she was lionized and respected by everyone back when she was alive. And it's just amazing that she was just absolutely forgotten by the world, including African Americans until recently. I would also recommend, if you're interested, this is the best single volume I could find. It's American Silent Film by William K. Everson. It's really, really well written, concise, and I think about as much as you can get in one volume about the growth of the American film industry during its early ages. And it got me, I've loved silent films for a long time, but it really got my juice flowing. There's just some great.
If you could indulge me really quickly, Doug, what is the title of your book again?
Signs of Bisbee.
Oh, that's right. And Mike, the ballpark.
Warren Ballpark.
That's the title.
It's very imaginative.
It's excellent. I love it.
And this is a book, Vaudeville and the Making of Modern Entertainment. And this is by David Monod. And it's, again, as good of a one volume work as you can find on vaudeville. I'm sure that you could get this through Allison's good services right there. This is a fascinating period, and it would be, I am so looking forward, and I hope you folks are too, so looking forward to seeing the Royale rise from the ashes and be turned into a performing arts facility again. So let us hope that there's art, there's music, and cinema,
theater,
and drama, all those things, strippers and jugglers, everything.
Mike, before we leave, I did have one quick question, which is that the Orpheum was built in 1907, as was the current library building, which is the same architect as
Frederick Hearst.
Frederick Hearst. Was the Orpheum also Frederick Hearst?
Yes, it was. And you can see some similarities.
You really can. It's there. And Jenny had asked about the second library, which was in that earlier photo. The second library was built in the same style, same architect as the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, and actually had amazing custom enclosed shelf units that were cases with carved embellishments and glass. And I believe Frederick Hearst also is the architect of the Bisbee Royale when it was a church.
That wouldn't surprise me in the least.
When it first was built. If
Trost didn't build it or didn't design it here, then it's probably done by Frederick Hearst, because he was he was the official, I believe he's the official architect for Phelps Dodge as well. So he had his hand in designing a lot of buildings in Bisbee.
How about the old Mormon church?
That I don't know. Where was that located at?
That was located up Main Street. It was turned into apartments, and it was across from the Bisbee Royale, maybe 500 yards. It was big. It's that big white building that you have to cross the little bridge to.
Does anybody else know where that might be?
Well, it's between Circle K and Peyton's.
Yeah.
Okay. And you think that might have also been designed by Hearst, or are you asking?
No, it's a more modern building.
Okay. Yeah. Hearst was operating in the first few years of the 20th century. He ended up moving to Phoenix think he died about 1934. He was a building inspector, so I think things went south during the Depression for him. But there are so many incredibly beautiful buildings here, and we lost a lot of incredibly beautiful buildings in this town too, to the pit, to God, I would love to see. And Doug, do you have a picture of the Schmidt building in your book?
No,
Oh boy, there's one I'd love to find. Those are hard photos to locate. And
Well,
I'll be,
sorry.
yeah,
Mike.
no, fine.
Well, I was just going to make a plug for design review, just because this is exactly why we have design review board and have Old Bisbee designated as a historic district, so that we don't lose any more buildings and we don't lose that history. And I think it's just really magical to see a presentation like this as a reminder for the people who have been before design review and jumped through those hoops with paperwork. This is why, so that we can preserve this amazing and rich history. I really thank you, Mike, for this insightful presentation.
Yeah, it could have been worse.
It was wonderful. I did, while I was looking for Black Patty Ciceretta, I did see that there was a record label,
There was.
Black Patty record label that had music, different groups
yeah.
on that label.
I believe they did spirituals and blues, and there was a peacock on the label, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. And so it's
Yeah.
quite possible that with her notoriety, she was able to partner and be part of a record label, which did sometimes happen with more prominent African Americans.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up, and it may be in the book. She was a very wealthy woman for a time. She owned 4 houses. I mean, she was making money hand over fist. She was a very, very sought after concert performer. And then she quit just all of a sudden, 1915. She needed to take care of her mom. And that's, I'd say that makes Ciceretta Jones a stand-up guy, that she would give it all up in order to take care of her alien mother.
well, there's what he's talking about here.
Yeah, I don't know if you can get him to see that.
No, I'm not.
I have one more quick question, Mike.
Okay.
This is Bob Houston.
Yeah, Bob.
Hey, Mike. When I was researching Bisbee 17, Ray Ewing, who was raised in Bisbee, said that before the Orpheum was built, they showed very early outdoor movies there.
You know, I would not be surprised. They did that at Warren Ballpark too. So that's, yeah. And you could show silent movies outside without disturbing the neighbors. Unless you brought a piano player with you. Oh, that's the other thing about the Orpheum and the Royal and all these other theaters that had
piano players.
performers. They had orchestras. So they hired local musicians. In fact, Frank McAleer, the piano player at the Royal in 1917, was deported. And when I found him and looked up his occupation, and it said piano player, it's like, yep, musicians union. He must have gone out on sympathy strike.
Oh, interesting. Doug, did you want to screen share something with us?
No, I was just looking at my book. There is a good picture of what did you call it? The
Royal,
where the Star Theater was.
Oh, where the Star Theater was, the one in the
where the parking lot is in Brewery Gulch.
Yeah, the Jacob Schmidt building.
Right. Anyway, it's on page, what does it say? 66.
Okay.
66. You can see it quite well.
Good deal.
I don't know that we can I'm
not
know how
gonna
to
put it on.
screen share.
Yeah.
Also, I got another question.
Yeah.
And that is that Buffalo Bill had Wild West Show was here for two consecutive years. I think it was 1902, 1904 or something like that. Have you seen any reference to that? I mean, we have a bill in which Buffalo Bill shows, and it shows having been in Bisbee, and I have several things in terms of just people commenting on the fact that they went to the show, but I've never seen any memorabilia in terms of promoting the show.
Nor I'm trying to imagine where the venue would be for something that
Well, it
big.
would have been at the ballpark.
But there was
That
no
would have been
ballpark. It
before
would have
the
been, it
ball.
would have had to have been at the ballpark down at the Don Louis.
Well, that's probably right.
Don Louis.
Yeah, yeah. There is absolutely no place in Old Bisbee
Right.
to hold any kind of outdoor event.
Right.
of
Well,
that
that's a
size.
good point. It would have been the
Yeah.
ballpark in Don
Right.
Louis.
Yeah, it would have had to been. Which
Yeah.
would be a great place to do an archaeological excavation if anybody ever wanted to do that, because what would you find out there besides petrified buffalo dung?
Maybe
Good,
some-
Mike.
Yeah, some
Buffalo
spurs.
Bill.
Maybe we should talk to Becky about that.
Yeah, it would be a wonderful place because that was used for the last part of the 19th century up until 1909 as a ballpark and a venue for public events. I hope everybody out there is getting your vaccines.
Yes, I hope so as well. And the Copper Queen Hospital has just announced a new pod, a vaccine pod, meaning point of delivery. They are receiving 500 more doses for Bisbee. So you can call the Copper Queen Hospital or go on their website. I posted it on the library Facebook page, and please, take a few minutes out of your day and see if you can sign up. If you are having trouble, please reach out to me and I will help, or call the main desk and get a message to me. I would, it would be my honor to help anybody who is having difficulty with the navigation of those websites.
What could be more easy than to navigate the system for getting vaccinations?
Right. So in other words, don't go through the Cochise County Health Department website, go through the Copper Queen Hospital website. It will be a little bit easier. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us. And I also wanted to let you guys know that it's a pretty great March, actually. We have Kim Allen Scott next week, next Tuesday night, doing the role of the film or of the newspaper editor in film and Westerns. So another kind of historical fun presentation. Then we have Doug Hawking on the 23rd. And then I'm very excited to say that Todd Miller has just come out with a new book. And Todd Miller will be joining us on March 30th. So some really fantastic authors that are going to walk in Mike's shadow in the month of March. And to Bob, thank you. I feel like we have a little celebrity for joining us in this presentation. So it's
And his
really
name is Mike.
And looking forward to seeing you and Pat in the near future, now that we've all been shot up.
We've all been jabbed.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, take the next day off after your second shot. I highly recommend.
Oh,
We
yeah.
learned from experience already.
P.S.
I slept all day.
Oh, I was out like a light.
And my wife said, why is that unusual?
Well, it's so great to see all of you. I miss you all, and 2021 is going to be great. We are going to have some socialization
Wow.
programs where we meet in person and find out what that feels like again. So have a wonderful evening, and thank you, Mike.
Thank
Happy
you.
trails.
Bye.
Very enjoyable.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.